Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast, can at times contain adult language and themes. It is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Digital Dissection podcast, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look at our favorite properties, creators, and topics. We are your humble hosts, Joe and Mark, two pop culture nerds dedicated to telling entertainment history before it's forgotten too soon. Join us on Facebook, Twitter, and our blog for more information on the show. We also love to hear from you. Write us at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get to dissecting. So Joe, what do you know about diamonds?
I don't know much over there with diamonds. I'm more of a caravan guy myself. Just kind of throwing things out there. Really like them on, I think, shiny. Yeah, they do it with the carrots and the radishes, right? Yeah.
You don't want no caravan, I got no fucking wheels. Yeah.
If you haven't figured out we're talking about Snatch right now, you have missed out on a serious classic.
Can you just believe that for a second, though? Think about it. Mm-hmm. This came out 22 years ago.
Right at the turn of the century.
Can you believe that, Joe? Seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Snatch came out 22 years ago. It boggles the mind.
Yeah, it's just, where's the time go? I mean, back then we were what? Good God, 24. What were we doing with our lives? Being in college and stuff. No, we're 22. We're not in college. We're not that old. Holy crap.
Joe,
I've done my math very poorly. Yeah. I adjusted for inflation immediatally. That's what happened.
Just say, man, holy shit. Joe needs his prune juice over there, man. He is not. Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah. 14. Definitely still in high school when this movie came out. Not in college.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say, dude, you're like, all of a sudden you became the Pepperidge Farm guy over there.
Yeah, as soon as it left my mouth, I'm like, no, this wasn't right. I definitely remember seeing this before I could drive. So a little off. We're
almost to the point where we should be like, do you remember when Guy Ritchie first started making movies? We remember.
Yes, it was before he used the acronyms to say he was a secret agent from Uncle.
Yes, this is the early days of the nation. Holy shit. The year is 2000, and a young man named Guy Ritchie, who was kind of flirting with Madonna. I don't know if he quite married her yet. I think he was pretty close.
Yeah, I could not say. The affairs of celebrities were not known to me at this time, as I was still trying to figure out girls my age, let alone what the popular ones were doing.
Well, that's what was funny about this was... Mm-hmm. He was dating her for a bit, marries her, right? And this was when she started using that fake British accent that everybody was like,
where did that come from? Yeah, I remember that. That was weird. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had a friend who did something like that once too. Like, he just started using an accent out of nowhere. He was talking about how like he doesn't dance, and it's like, what say dance. Like you can, that's not how you talk, man. What are you doing?
Yes.
He's like, I've always had an accent. No, you haven't. Wheat thins. All right.
Wheat. Yes. Say wheat. Wheat. Thins.
Wheat.
Thins. Say wheat thins. Wheat thins.
Wheat thins.
Oh, man. Yeah. This was from that era of forgotten pop culture. I feel like folks have blown past it because we've talked about Y2K on this show before, right? And how the end of the previous millennia was epic. We had tapered jeans, and I can't remember a whole lot else other than the tapered jeans. That's kind of sticking. I mean,
there were frosted tips, backwards red Yankees hats. Yes. I think those were all big at that time, and heist movies were pretty big at this time because this is around the times like you had like the Italian Job reboot. Would we consider that a reboot? They didn't really like decide to like start the franchise over. It was just
it's a remake at minimum.
There you go. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. Remake, not reboot. But yeah, no, we we had a handful of heist movies coming out, and which is also weird, like me thinking of this movie, like I thought of it as a heist movie when I first saw it, and I don't know why, because it's not really, it has heist movie-esque qualities to it, but it's not like Ocean's 11 necessarily.
It's an ensemble movie that feels like some of these other films. Now, I'll put it this way. When I first saw Snatch, I wasn't thinking about it in terms of a heist movie, but I get the vibe, though. Like, I get what you're saying. When I watched, like, Ocean's 11 and some of these other, crime movies after this, I did start to look at the box art for it and kind of go, yeah, I think if I saw this, I would misconstrue it as that, right? And
I think like the biggest thing that gets me thinking heist is definitely you've got that. They never say like let's get a team together, but usually after someone says let's get a team together, you have that small montage where it does a quick freeze frame on a character and then their name pops up, and that was like a heist movie thing. It's like a heist movie trope, and this movie does do that, and that's where but that's where it stops. That's where
this movie kind of brought that style, though. That's the thing. Like the whole putting the title cards with the characters' names in the beginning. That's kind of a throwback to some of these older spy like TV shows. Some of these older spy movies even do that. So it was an interesting choice to do that for Snatch, because obviously Snatch isn't a spy movie, but it definitely has a lot of style, though. That stylistic beginning with those cards was pretty different for 2000, man, and it stands up really well. 20 years later. Yeah,
and it's almost like the rest of like the cinematography in here. Like I wanted to compare it to Clerks, and the idea that like the original Clerks is you have it black and white. It looks like it's shot on a budget. And this film has kind of a gritty graininess to it, where it doesn't look like, obviously, like it doesn't look like it's filmed and shot on like home video, or like again like the full like Kevin Smith like Clerks thing, but it kind of does this weird thing where like it feels real as you're watching it, and exactly it fits the mood of the movie so well that it just feels real, and I think that's one of the many redeeming qualities of this movie.
I love that you say that, because it leads right into one of the things here in the very beginning of the movie, and that's that you're actually watching the intro of the film carried through security footage. Like you're sitting in the security room for what's essentially like a diamond trading organization, right?
Yes.
You start the movie with that, and it starts with a couple of rabbis walking into this facility, which... correct me if I'm wrong, I assume that there is a bris that was supposed to happen that didn't end up happening, from what I could tell.
I believe so. And I think kind of like this Guy Ritchie banter that he's kind of known for putting in his movies is something you also see kind of unfold here. Like the dialogue is intriguing, but completely unrelated to everything else going on. But it fits what the characters are doing.
I was going to say, not necessarily. That's actually something about this intro that I thought was really funny in this movie. So we actually meet Benicio Del Toro, who plays Frankie Four Fingers. We don't obviously know this yet, but he's disguised as a rabbi, and he's walking into, once again, he's part of this crew. Now, I thought it was interesting, since they're rabbis, they're talking about the Virgin Mary and how the Bible was a mistranslation. The whole virgin idea was mistranslated, which is what led to... modern Christianity, which would make sense, Joe, if you think about the Jewish faith and the Torah and how the original books of the Bible, were adapted, right? So it does make sense they'd be talking about this as a topic as rabbis, which sells the whole thing.
Completely, yeah, because it fits what the characters are doing, like hardcore. And this is even something like I think when I watched it, I wasn't really paying too much close attention to it. Like, like they're just talking about why, like this is what the Jewish people believe. But I remember like even later taking like a Jewish studies course the Jewish studies course in college, and going much further into the Torah. And like, this makes a lot of sense that the word for virgin and young woman are just very, very close together. And the whole idea of like the Septuagint, when that was said in the movie, I had no idea what it was when I was 14. And then when you figure out there's this whole legend or this idea that 40 people sat down and made 40 translations of the Bible, and they were all exactly the same. One, you can believe that all you want. I would never believe that 40 people did the exact same thing and got it exactly right. Because clearly, again, a quick little spelling error like that can change the whole thing. Someone writes something a little sloppy, and they're like, "Oh, this must have been virgin and not young woman." So again, dialogue was perfect for the characters being in character, but it just like there's so much like screen time dedicated to it that it feels like it should weigh more on the overall plot. And that's not a knock against it. It's just it's a Guy Ritchie thing that he does in his movies, and it's something you appreciate because it just kind of makes you think, even though it's not even necessarily thinking about what's going on in the movie.
Well, it's a very important thing as a distinction, because people who have seen Reservoir Dogs by Quentin Tarantino would know what this vibe is, because in the beginning of Reservoir Dogs, which is also a movie about a jewel heist, believe it or not, they start the movie off by talking about Madonna and Like a Virgin and what it means. And so that was Guy Ritchie paying homage to that and going, I'm going to start my movie off with a similar type of conversation. And so that's where this comes from. That's why we have this banter going into, this jewel heist. So it's Inception in a way. We've got a couple references referencing each other.
There's some layering going on there, but before we get too far from the cast, because you did mention Benicio Del Toro already, this is a very, very star-studded cast for really its time, or even now, because our main guy, Turkish, is played by Jason Statham. One of the earlier films I remember seeing him in, because this is like pre-Transporter, before the Fast and the Furious.
Pre-Italian Job.
He's a part of the Fast and Furious, pre-Italian Job. Which again, also great that the heist movie thing takes off there. But also Brad Pitt, and this is after Fight Club, isn't it? I'm trying to remember when I feel like Fight Club was like 97.
Fight Club was, I think, just the year before, maybe two. Like it was very close together, exactly. Which is why Brad Pitt even considered, I don't know if I want to be in this movie as a boxer, because this is really close to what I just did. But hey, he loved Guy Ritchie so much, he's like, fuck it, let's do it. I don't care.
Yep, let's do it. And at least it had there's the whole like fighting aspect of his character, but I think we can agree that Mickey is a distinctively different character than Tyler Durden was in Fight Club.
He totally is. Yep. And on the topic of Benicio Del Toro for a second, I feel like Benicio Del Toro was one of those actors at this point in time that I think everybody had some kind of adoration for, because we didn't really know him as like a director or even a writer at this stage. He was still known for, a few bit parts here and there. People really liked what he did. I was obviously like The Usual Suspects is a great movie.
Yep.
And so he plays the perfect eccentric weirdo, but at the same time, this movie has a ton of details packed into it. And what I thought was really important about this opening scene, didn't realize it when I was like 13 or 14 years old, of course. As I got older, though, you start to realize this whole guise of them pretending to be rabbis, right? He convinces these people that he's a rabbi that the owner of this place knows already, right? They sell it with the impression of even traditional Jewish accents and everything. Like he's doing an accent as he goes in there. And at first I didn't even realize it was him, right? So it tells you.
Don't. Especially because you're doing it through this security guy. Like you said, like that whole opening scene is you see through security cameras. So it's got this like 90s, early 2000s, like low definition, like grainy, like security camera footage. So anyone who could tell that was Benicio Del Toro from the get-go, like you were a fan. Because I didn't see it coming. Like it wasn't until like you actually have him actually getting the diamond in the scene of like the big reveal that they are in fact not rabbis, that you could tell is Benicio Del Toro.
And the final thing about this I wanted to mention about this opening heist scene, these guys aren't schmucks, okay? Yeah. A lot of times you see these comedic films where the bad guys are hapless and they just happen to get through this, okay? These guys have revolvers, okay? Now, Joe, do you know what an important thing about a revolver is in a bank heist?
Well, from my knowledge of basically every action movie, heist movie, or anything ever made, if it's automatic, it will miss 99.9% of the time if it's an automatic rifle. If it's a shotgun, it's just boom and scary and it'll blow a hole in the wall. But revolvers, like 100% accurate. They always work. They always hit.
The important thing is they don't leave evidence behind.
Ooh.
And so that's why it was like, okay, these guys are all holding revolvers. And it's like suddenly I go, these guys are like, this is years later, obviously, not as a teenager, but I watched this later and I go, this is a really important thing. Like, these guys are not fucking around. Like, holy shit, this is these are like professionals here, which is a little uncommon for a comedy, right? So
very, yeah. I'd say I would say even for actual like attempted drama and like action movies, it's uncommon to like have that much thought put into a heist scene, because again, usually the louder and more like action packed, the better. So unless the revolver is like Dirty Harry size and looking really cool in your face, they usually just go for the Glock.
Yeah. Instead, these people were very clear. We don't want anyone to know that we did this, and we're moving on. So I thought that was really cool, because a lot of these heist movies at the time, I feel like they weren't this careful. I feel like they weren't paying as close of attention either. And so right away, like if you're an adult watching this movie, I feel like you're going to appreciate this a lot more. It's just something that not a lot of movies do. And it's not the movie telling you these people are professionals. It's the details that do it. So
yeah,
really, really cool opening. But yes, on the topic of diamonds, Joe, we opened it up with it. That's what the whole point of the heist is. It's to literally grab a diamond the size of a fist. And are you surprised that more than one person's interested in this thing?
Oh no. Like this thing, I'm not gonna say it's like Great Hope diamond, because I don't really honestly can't remember what that means. I know it was really big and expensive. So that's why we make like, you know, a big deal of the Great Hope diamond. But it was huge. It was massive. And I'm assuming worth lots of money.
Yeah, well, of course.
It's 84 karat, which means it's was it 84 or 85?
I think it was 84. I think you're right. It's
84.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was right. 84. Yeah. So it's a very, very pure diamond. So I could definitely understand why people would really want to have that thing.
What I love about it is it's one of several factors that kind of kick this movie into gear, right? Because it does shift throughout a little bit, and we'll cover that. But ultimately, the beginning of the movie is predicated on this diamond, and there are several parties who are very interested in obtaining it and getting it. And so that's what kind of leads us into, as you mentioned, the star-studded cast. But one of these people is Dennis Farina. And how familiar were you with Dennis Farina, like when you saw this movie?
At this point in time, not very. I'd have to say at this point in my career of trying to absorb media, there are only a few actors I think were consistently on my list of like, I got to see that guy. But Dennis Farina was not one of them.
That's fair enough. My brothers and I were clearly, I don't want to say we're screwed up people, but we definitely appreciated some of the finer tastes in life. And at this point in time, Dennis Farina, he had some time under his belt in terms of being an actor. I think people would most likely remember him from like Midnight Run. He was in Get Shorty, if you remember that. He was also on Crime Story and Law and Order. That's where a lot of folks saw him from, was Law and Order. He played Joe Fontana, I think, on that long running role. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. He passed in 2013. Yeah, but for me though, he was the host of Unsolved Mysteries after Robert Stack when it kind of came back. So yeah, we miss you. We miss you, Dennis.
We do. And as the sole American in this movie, we appreciate you.
That's right. Yeah, he is the sole American, which
Hmm.
his involvement in this movie at first is just being interested in the diamond itself. But
Yeah.
but what I love about this is how quickly they explain what Frankie Four Fingers means. And Joe,
Hmm.
did you get any comedic value out of that whole explanation and what transpired?
I mean, how couldn't you? Like, it's the idea that he's Frankie Four Fingers because he's known for making crappy bets and having certain things lobbed off. So, like, it was a good laugh. Like, when he finds out that Frankie has this diamond and he's going into a bookie with it, he just
Yes.
loses his mind. It's like, are you
Yes.
kidding me? You've given Frankie Four Fingers. You may not be, what is it? You may not know a whole lot about diamonds, but you are fucking stupid, I think was the line that he used to the man who was talking to him.
Yes.
The head, yeah, it's like, you might
Doug
know
the Head. Yeah.
pretty great. Doug the Head, yeah. So definitely a solid laugh because you definitely see Farina just losing his shit. And this is of course like over the phone. But yeah.
And that's what I love about, so he plays the character of Cousin Avi, which when I first saw this movie, he completely took over the screen for me because he goes from like happy, he's ecstatic that they got the diamond, and then he suddenly finds out that Frankie is uncovering some of his gambling issues. And my brother and I, Nate, obviously he's been on the show. You've met Nate. When Nate and I first saw this movie, we were laughing hysterically every time they do the Viva Las Vegas like aside.
Yeah.
When they show him enjoying himself gambling and then immediately regretting it, and he's got the tissue on his forehead and all that,
just
like
sweating like crazy.
Yes. So immediately Frankie Four Fingers should never be trusted with anything involving finances. And so what's really cool about this from a stylistic standpoint is that once Avi finds that out, he moves just as fast as the movie does. He's instantly in America, and then he's instantly in England. And the first thing that he says, "Shut up and sit down, you big bald fuck."
And I also have to say, because you get to see Avi going back and forth between the States and England twice in this movie, and the small like that same thing where we had Benicio Del Toro whenever he gambled, you got Viva Las Vegas. Whenever Avi leaves and goes, you get this like he takes a shot. You have a plane going, and then like a stamp going down wherever he is, and like the first couple things he says when he gets like to where he's going. Fucking fantastic. Great little montages they put together for this.
God, yes. Oh, it is so funny. And the thing is, this movie does this really well. It's not just here. Like the subtleties of its humor are obviously there. And sometimes we're not even talking about punchlines. They're just like really quick, like micro millisecond types of things. And they just have you cracking up. So yeah, it's crazy how well he did that in this movie. I was like completely taken away by this when I was a teenager watching it the first time. And as an adult, I realized how few movies can execute this as well as this one did.
Yeah, because it is complicated. Like you said that this is not, again, we said it wasn't a heist movie so much as this like ensemble movie. And you have this very, very large cast of characters for us to try and focus on in this short span of like an hour and 40 minutes. It's not terribly long by today's movie standards at all.
Yeah.
And this movie does such a good job of basically focusing on one aspect of the story from like a group of characters' perspective, and then shifting again, and then eventually bringing them all together to bring the story into a head. And even the way, like, almost like you think of like how like Quentin Tarantino will start you like 3/4 of the way through the movie right at the start, and then he brings you like how you got to there. This movie has a bit of that, but there's even more layering on top of it, and it's just part of like the great filmmaking that you have here to tell the story. And I think I've always had a favorite group or a favorite like story arc of characters in this movie, but we'll get to them in a little bit, because there is a lot going on before we meet them. Because I think at this point we should probably focus a little more on, I think where you probably have are the true protagonists of this movie, and that's Turkish and Tommy.
Yes, and we'll get there really quick. The only thing I want to mention though, before we get any further, keep in mind this is Guy Ritchie's like second full-length feature film. Like before this, he had Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which people complained was a very similar movie, and it wasn't just fans; it was critics. Like critics said that this movie is pretty much the same thing. Well, I can agree with you in some aspects. He clearly learned from his experiences, and so everything we're going to talk about here, I think, is truly like I wouldn't say it's peak Guy Ritchie, but this is the style of Guy Ritchie that I think people truly grasped and understood. And so very, very important detail, I think, in his like cinematic career at this point.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And then I think that argument when you look at like this movie versus Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, it's like, you know what? When I buy a Twix bar, I know I'm getting two of them in there, and that's the style Twix is handing out. I don't get mad at the second Twix for tasting just as good as the first one, because that's what I feel about this movie. It is distinctive enough, but obviously it's the same director, and he's going to, I don't know. It's like it'd be like being mad at Scorsese for a few of his movies being too close to each other. Like it's kind of like one of those things where like you go and see this director, you're going to be able to tell that director did it, and you shouldn't be mad about it. You should almost, I guess I'm having trouble really trying to like describe this well, because I don't want to like defend certain things. Cause like, Michael Bay, well, it's going to be a Michael Bay movie. It's a blockbuster. It's a summer thing. It's not going to be Oscar worthy. You know what you're getting. Just sit down and enjoy the ride. Whereas Guy Ritchie is going to have like his own style, and it's not fast paced action and big explosions. But you'll be able to tell it's a Guy Ritchie movie.
But that's a really important thing to mention here, because for someone who's trying to introduce you to an ensemble cast in a movie, you touched on this a little bit. We've already met like 3 groups of people, actually technically 4, because we also meet Boris the Blade, who's played by Radej Trebedja, the guy that was in Eurotrip. That
number one new favorite show.
Where's the beef? Like he's introduced right away too, and so suddenly we've got this like crazy table set that already has like really weird people involved, and that's the first like 3-4 minutes of the movie. So I my hat tip is there. But as you mentioned, the real main characters of this movie, are 2 boxing promoters, and they're trying to figure out the world. And I thought that was really cool to kind of take this like big heist moment and then bring it down to these 2 guys who are kind of the hapless people. They're not the smartest.
Nope.
They don't have the most resources, right? They're just kind of every.
And I would wager to say that of like basically in a comedic crime movie that's filled with a cast of characters who are swindlers, robbers, thieves, or people who feed other people to their pigs, these 2 are the most innocent in the entire movie. Like they maybe have a small sordid past because I don't know, they're boxing promoters. It's a dying sport even at this time. It's hard to make it through. I'm sure they've done something they probably shouldn't have here and there to be able to make it by. But comparatively to everyone else, they're not bad. Not bad people.
Yeah, they're definitely the good guys. If we need that distinction, right? And so obviously people know who Jason Statham is, who plays Turkish. And Stephen Graham plays Tommy. And Stephen Graham he's actually a really, really solid, like underrated actor. And he was also in like Gangs of New York. That's actually where I noticed him first, was Gangs of New York. He plays a really good supporting role in that, but he also plays a really good role in this. And it's because right away you can tell his role was to be bullied by people. Like they set it up right away. When he says, his name's Tommy. He says it's after the gun, but I know it's actually after a dancer.
Tommy, he's fronting.
Yeah, poor Tommy. And so
but Statham does pick on him because he knows it toughens him up. But at the end of the day, he's like a brother. So
yeah. There's definitely that dynamic. Like they, even though they're like business partners, they actually run a like cheap casino because they got like coin machines and stuff that they do on the side. But yeah, seeing them enter this world and starting to work with the world of unlicensed boxing is truly interesting to me, because they mention that, yeah, this stuff pays the bills, but we need to do something to honestly make more money, or we're going to be, we're going to be above our necks in things if we don't change.
Yeah.
So immediately, first thought, I would have thought diversify the portfolio. I wouldn't have thought, let's work with a sadistic, murderous, and crazy individual known as Bricktop.
Yeah, say if you're messing with a guy named Bricktop where you don't even know his real name, not worth getting into business with that dude. No,
I mean,
not at all.
In hindsight, when you view this years later after your first sampling of it, it's like I don't know if I would have gone there right away. I might have thought, like, hey, maybe let's offer some food at this establishment. Not necessarily breaking laws and murdering people. I mean, hey, to each their own, right? But Joe, what did you think about Bricktop as your first impression once they enter this like underground?
So one, like, Bricktop's like actually like introduction, I guess, like in his title card sequence. One thing I think even like stepping back to that, I think the title card sequence to introduce a large cast of characters is a lost art, because living in basically the MCU, like, I guess, era of filmmaking, where every character gets their own full movie to establish them before you get them in an ensemble movie, so that way you know them in the background. You get enough to know that Bricktop really should not be fucked with in his 45-second introduction, when he goes over, what is he? I think he's talking about like the ups and downs of like owning a pig farm or something. No, it's not that. It's not that. He goes in that a little bit, but he, like, some other character who like you never see again after this. He's talking about how like he's worthless and he's like a dog, or he has dog-like characteristics, but they're all the dog characteristics except for being loyal, which is the only good one. And the next thing you know, the guy he's talking to is getting tased and he's got a bag over his head and he's getting brought down. And it was actually another character that came with a person who was tased that was willing to basically fuck over his own friend to save his own skin. And you would think that maybe Bricktop would be like, hey, look at this guy. Like, he's on my side here. He makes one compliment to him, then turns around and says some British term for basically calling him, like, you fucked over your own buddy, and I don't appreciate that. And now he's got a bag over his head. And then he's walking around and just says, feed him to the pigs. And it's like, well, this guy, despite his like bottle cap thick glasses, being older and having horrible teeth, don't fuck with him.
So here's the thing. What's funny about this is that the intro for this movie, that title card sequence, Bricktop is actually smacking someone's teeth out of their mouth with a mallet. Like he's forcefully coming down on their face with it. So you almost don't even need to know at all what this guy's about. You just know he's willing to inflict any kind of,
lots of pain.
Yeah, any pain that's necessary, he'll do it. Now, here's a really quick aside, because we love some of the behind the scenes stories. We share them a lot. Alan Ford, who plays Bricktop, he's actually a very, very sweet man. Okay,
I believe it.
Yeah, he's an animal rights activist.
Why not do you believe it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's an animal rights activist. He's a human rights activist. He's a volunteer for these efforts. So it is so crazy to see. I mean, they're actors, right? Actors are going to act. But just to see the things he does off screen and then compare him to what you saw in this movie, it's like, holy shit, how did you channel that? I almost don't want to know.
The range of this guy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But hey, Joe, it was the range of a different actor that almost played Bricktop that I feel like it's kind of changed cinema history here in a way. Now, do you know who the original person was that they targeted for Bricktop?
Sylvester Stallone.
Not. I mean, I'll give you some credit because technically these guys are both pretty prolific right around the same time. But it was Sir Sean Connery that they targeted for this role.
That would have worked. Just because Sean Connery works in pretty much everything you throw him in, but that would have especially worked for this movie.
Well, hey, just imagine if Sean Connery delivered, Bricktop's big speech about what a nemesis means, a righteous infliction of retribution manifested by an appropriate agent. Yeah, imagine that, but it was slurred and had a lot of shushes in it. Well, the story behind this, so Guy Ritchie wanted to get Sean Connery for the role, and they put together like a quick demo / reel for this to kind of give him an idea. So they hastily put it together. They rent out a private theater for Sean Connery to go see it. He watches it. He loves it. The reaction's great. And so he says to the producers at that point, he goes, that was a great thing, but you can't afford me. And he was right.
Oh,
he was right.
Sense.
There's no way they could have afforded him for this movie. Yeah, the grosses just weren't going to be there. So
no.
So yeah,
not for Connery money.
It was a budget of $10 million. They never would have been able to get him, unfortunately.
No, Jesus. At that rate, right? I was thinking, at this point, you've got like Julia Roberts is one of the highest paid actresses, and she's like what, like $22 million a movie, and then again, Connery, big name. I don't know what he was pulling in at the time, but it was over 10 million.
Well, we're not just talking about Sean Connery. We're talking about sexiest man alive, Sean Connery, at this point.
True.
So you'd have to sell an 86 karat diamond to be able to afford this man for this. Oh, it was an 86 karat diamond. Look at that. Just coming out of the ether.
Oh, off by 2 carats. Damn.
Yeah. Just pulled it out of the ether. There it was. Yeah. So either way, we didn't have Sean Connery for this, but Alan Ford as Bricktop, like the main baddie of this movie, his presence is immediately felt. And he actually helped shape Bricktop even more than we realized, because when they were talking about how he says that the worst people in the world would torture dogs, there's a very specific line that he delivers. Well, the way that he delivered it, Guy Ritchie thought, wow, Bricktop really thinks that torturing a dog is one of the worst things that a human can do, and he has no limits. So they actually went back. They went back and recorded him torturing the dog so that Bricktop wouldn't just be maniacal, but he'd also be contradicting himself. Like, that's how evil this guy is.
I assumed that he was just kind of making a comment on himself that he is one of the worst things out there. So he was almost adding to his own reputation.
There you go. I think that's true. And that's what was really cool about what they did with this movie. Like, there's a lot of stuff in this movie that did kind of happen organically, just like a lot of creative endeavors. But a lot of this was in line. And Joe, to your point, you opened with this. One of the most incredible performances in this movie would happen to involve caravans and a flight of people who travel from town to town.
Yes.
Now, we talked about this before. Brad Pitt didn't care really what he was doing. He just wanted to work with Guy Ritchie.
That's fair.
I have to say, that decision elevates this movie from something that a lot of people may have appreciated, but came up to a completely different height with this. Now, what is your viewpoint on, we're calling them the Irish Travelers because the vocabulary has changed since this movie's come out. We'll put it that way.
Yes.
So Joe, what's your viewpoint of the Irish Travelers that Brad Pitt belongs to, and where they fit within this movie?
Well, one, for our friends in the States, when we say caravan, if you're unfamiliar with the term and are thinking that it means like actually several vehicles like strung in a row and they're just working or like driving in the same direction and they intend on going to the same destination, that is definitely a convoy, not a caravan. Or like, wrong thing. Caravans in our term, basically an RV or a camper. Is what you're thinking of. And I think specifically like caravans are campers to us. So in this case, they are, I think they also throw out the word gypsy and that they're just kind of wanderers and vagabonds, and a little bit of that. They are their own people. They're not Irish. They're not English. There's something in between, and they just go and do whatever. It's kind of like, an odd, like, redneck freedom that they live, if we have to compare it to anything in the States.
Yes. Yeah, if this was like an unincorporated town without a police department, that's what this feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And now, when it comes to details, we've talked about this a couple times, like the details of this movie, there's plenty of them in every scene.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very important detail about the first time that we meet Brad Pitt's character of Mickey. Do you remember what he's doing the first time you see him on screen?
So is this during his title card sequence, or is this when he is now actually we're seeing him talk for the first time?
Yeah, the very first time he's actually like in the movie outside of the title screen.
So he's hiding behind a car as Tommy and Gorgeous George come in. And I'm trying to I still kind of trying to think what the fuck he's doing behind the car.
Technically, yes, hiding is the I think it's the right term in a sense. He's literally going to the bathroom behind a car.
That's what I thought. Yeah,
yeah, because he's got his pants lowered. He's looking up over the car to make sure they can't see him. And then you see him pull his pants up and fasten his belt again. Now, here's the thing: if he was just taking a piss behind this car,
I don't see that far.
I don't see why he'd be squatting
down
over.
That far. Yep.
He's clearly taking a shit behind this truck when they first come up.
And I'm going to assume he didn't wipe at the speed at which he pulled his pants up.
There's no way he doesn't wipe his ass. So the first time that you see Mickey on screen, the dude, he's like when you put your hand in the jar of peanut butter and you accidentally touch the side. Like that is what's going on with him below the belt the first time you see him on camera.
Yep.
And it sets the tone for what the Irish travelers are doing, what his character is like. He is literally like a walking form of chaos.
I think that's a good way to put him. And I think the best scene with him, actually, I mean, granted, like, there are a lot of really good scenes with Brad Pitt in this movie as Mickey. And I think one of the best ways to establish his character is, one, when they sell a faulty caravan to Tommy and Gorgeous George there, and it makes it all of 6 feet, and then the axle just falls off.
Yeah.
Not great. Then they agree to, like, basically he would fight Gorgeous George for the price of the RV. And, like, Mark, describe what's happening to Brad Pitt as we open in this fight.
So here's what the really important detail is. Brad Pitt is surrounded by all these people that know him. As soon as you see him start fighting Gorgeous George, who's easily got probably 50 to 60 pounds on him, not to mention half a foot worth of height.
I was going to say, to quote Mickey in this, when he sees Gorgeous George step out of the car for the first time, it's, oh, he's a big fucker.
Yeah. You're a big fucker. Yeah.
You're a big fucker. Look at his size. How big is he, kids? How big is he? That's the size of him.
So when you see this fight, you know that Gorgeous George is going to just lay down some hurting bombs. But the important detail is to watch what's going on with the crowd watching this fight. Because when they're sizing up Gorgeous George, who is, obviously the Turkish and Tommy's prize fighter, right? Like he's the one that they're trying to put in this fight with Bricktop. Everyone that's watching what's going on, they're all looking at Gorgeous George as if they know something, right? Every single one of them. When it gets into the actual ring and you see them fight over we'll call it the honor of the caravan, right?
Yes.
And getting the money back. The people watching the fight that are part of this clan, none of them are even looking at Gorgeous George. They're all yelling at Mickey going, come on. It's like, you're just going to let him hit you? Because they all know that he's a bare knuckle boxing champion. Yeah. They all know it. And, and that's a consistent thing with his group of people. They always know somehow more than everybody else, like in this movie.
Completely. And also, if I were George and I were really walloping on this guy, if I'd have taken 2 seconds to realize every time he gets back up, or I just really hit him hard and he's kind of pushed back from his buddies, and it looks like he's just physically stretching.
Yeah.
No, there's something else going on here. something's rigged. We need to stop right now. We'll take our broken caravan and go.
Yep. Which I think is great that the Irish Traveler group even exists in the first place, because it's also a commentary on what Guy Ritchie thought about people that made fun of them for Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. A lot of people complained that they couldn't understand what the characters were saying in his first movie. They're just so British that they can't tell. His commentary back to them was going, all right, fine.
Okay.
You want to fucking have a problem with how people speak in England? We are going to create a character to people that you don't know what they're saying, and the people in the movie don't even know what he's saying.
Yep.
And so that's why we even have this entire segment of this movie. Like it's a walking commentary, as a big fuck you to people that were pissed off about Lock, Stock.
Love it. And I mean, I almost want to say like an integral part of the movie, with that you cannot understand them all the time and what they're saying, but how that also like kind of works to their advantage quite a bit is that they know that you can't understand them, and they play on that. And while they are a really big part, I feel like there's one more big group of people here we haven't really gotten to. And these are actually my favorite ones of the movie. They get introduced in because they own, I think, basically what a pawn shop is their part here. And we first meet them, I think, when they're dealing with Boris the Blade. And this is Sol, Vince, and Tyrone. And
I love it because
God.
Boris the Blade hires them, right, to try to get the suitcase away from So why am I forgetting Frankie Four Fingers? Good Lord. He hires these guys, and once again, this is me speaking on behalf of my brother because we love this movie so much. When you see these guys, Sol and Vince aren't really well known, because when we talked about the hapless main characters that don't always know what they're doing, that's who Sol and Vince are.
Yeah.
they are so inept at everything they do.
Oh, yeah.
They have no profile in the criminal world, while everybody else here kind of does, right? Everybody else kind of knows each other in some way, except for these guys.
Yes, I mean you get Sol like clearly knowing like his diamonds. They establish that right away, because someone comes in with something that's worth nothing, thinking they have like something worth a few $100s at the very least. But then Vince comes in and quickly establishes that that's not going to be the case for this group for very long, as he doesn't even know what the hell he's doing with his dog.
Yes,
like he got in a deal with our nomadic Irish friends, because apparently they just always like to throw dogs in with everything they do.
It's true.
And he thought it'd be great for the shop. And he very quickly like lets it off of its leash, takes the collar off, wants to get to know the shop, and in walks Boris the Blade, and the dog takes off right out of the door.
Yep.
And Vince has to go chasing after him, which is where we get the whole idea of how they are going to try and get the briefcase. And that, when we go to get the briefcase from Freddy Four Fingers, is when we get to meet Tyrone.
Yes,
Tyrone is on the heftier side of physique. He's a bigger guy, and apparently is like the hired wheelman, because at some point he had driven a rally car. They didn't say he raced the rally car, but he had driven a rally car. Therefore, he's the getaway driver.
Okay, all right. Now,
oh my God!
You know I've been a hefty man. I've been a very large man in various parts of my life. Husky, I think, is the agreed to term nowadays. But one of the funniest sequences I've ever seen in a movie, and it's watching Tyrone try to get out of this car, this little tiny car that he owns. And I mean, they've got this fantastic little sound effect that to me sounds like a trash bag that's like being pulled out of a can. That's just like there's too much stuff in the trash bag.
Yep.
And he's like trying to pull himself out of this car. And it's so painful to watch. It's probably like a 10 or 15 second like clip. And he's just trying to get out of the door. And then Sol turns to Vince, and it's like, he's a getaway driver. What the fuck can he get away from?
And that line brings up a really good point that I think we should have started with, and that is that there's like no real wasted dialogue in this movie. One, that was basically like witty banter, but like even like with Boris the Blade, when you first hear about his character, It's when basically Guillermo del Toro's character, Freddy Four Fingers, is being told that when you get to London, you talk to Boris the Blade, who can get you a gun. And they talk about how he's a tough son of a bitch to kill, which does come back later in the movie. But when you go to have Sol, Vince, and Tyrone actually go and try and get the briefcase from Freddy Four Fingers, they know he's going to place this bet with a diamond that he's putting on the line for the whole thing. And they have this whole thing where he's not going to back into a parking space. He's going to go to another spot. And the reason why is because there's not enough room there. Yes. And you, of course, got Vince making fun of Tyrone. Like, you could park an airship over there. Like, you could
park a jumbo fucking aircraft in there, Vincent.
Yeah. So Tyrone finally gives in and goes to actually back into this space and begin to parallel park. And he flies so fast in there that he just rams the rear end of his tiny car right into the car parked behind it. And Vince is like, "What the hell, Tyrone? Thought you were supposed to be a good driver." And Tyrone's like, "It was at a weird angle."
Yeah, it was a funny angle.
It was a funny angle. He's like, "It's a 400-pound truck, Tyrone, and it's right behind us."
Yeah,
things are typically come from behind when you're in reverse.
It's compacted into like this. Once again, it's not wasted dialogue because it's not very long. Like, it's a very short sequence, and they hit you with all of these funny things between these guys. And not to mention that, Saul's name, Solomon's like short name, Saul stands for shit out of luck. So you kind of know that these guys are probably not going to end up on the right side of any of these things. And sure enough, when they try to actually rob the bookies, that Bricktop operates, the fact that the two guys with the least amount of experience were the ones doing it cracks me up, because when they're looking at the security footage, they don't even know who these guys are. Like, they've done so little in life when it comes to like the crime side of things, which everybody else, once again, is established. They don't notice anything about these guys. The only person they recognize is like a blip on the security footage, who's Tyrone. Like, Tyrone shows up on there, and of course, right away, they know who he is.
Which I think we need to understand, like, a little bit of the obviously their heist goes wrong here. When their heist, their robbing of the bookie goes wrong, and then they try leaving. And this is after security has been like activated and like protective walls have come up over the bookie, and they want to get out, and they're kicking the door to get out.
Yeah.
And then, like, it's a security door. We can't do that. So they shoot at it, and it's bulletproof glass, so the bullets are bouncing around doing anything. They give up, slide down, they take their ski masks off, and realize that there's a security camera there. And then in walks Tyrone, because the door is a fucking push and not from their directive, it's a pull and not a push. So they're kicking against the door, and of course it won't open because it has to open inward. So they didn't even try opening the damn door. They just
to add insult to injury. Lenny James, the actor who plays Saul, who would go on to like Walking Dead fame, during this sequence when they were filming him like shooting the door and like blowing a hole in it, he actually accidentally hit himself in the crotch during that part. So not only is he like in pain because of the shooting the gun and accidentally like clipping his own leg, he was actually in pain because he hit his own nutsack during that. So you're actually seeing the take from him having hit his own balls during that scene.
So that makes sense, because you saw that, you see it happen on screen, and it actually takes you back for a second, because you're like, wait, what the fuck happened to him? Like, he didn't get hit by anything.
Yeah, he's like wincing.
He's wincing. The recoil of himself.
Yeah, and it's hilarious.
It's to the point where I don't know, I think the first time I saw this, I didn't catch that it actually hit him in the nuts. So I thought that maybe there's like a deleted scene that probably should have stayed in, that maybe someone hit him like when they're trying to run away or something. It's now not there. No, he just hit himself in the nuts with his shotgun.
Which is one of those things that obviously I didn't know when I first saw it, but when I watched it again and I listened to the commentary and everything, it's like, like Lenny James accidentally tapped his own nutsack during the scene, and it just makes it that much funnier to know that's what happened. And I think the only person that we haven't really talked about in this movie so far, because for the most part, these characters kind of pull each other in and out of the plot of the film. The only person that we didn't really talk about would be Bullet Tooth Tony.
See, and this is where we should probably fully consider turning this into just a full-on Vinnie Jones dedicated podcast, because we've done 3 movies with him so far, which I think is more than any other actor in our podcast. Because we had him in Gone 60 Seconds right away in season 1. We just did Euro Trip with Vinnie Jones. And I think this is like escalatingly levels of Vinnie Jones-ness. This is very Vinnie Jones movie.
Oh, God,
because the whole idea of Bullet Tooth Tony is that he was shot not once, not twice, not even thrice, but 6 times.
6
in one sitting, I guess is the best way to put that. And he had some of the bullets melted down and turned into teeth for him. So he is now Bullet Tooth Tony.
All the while listening to Lucky Star by Madonna, which cracks me up because of the connection to, to Guy Ritchie at this point in time. And, it's my favorite song. Yeah, so Bullet Tooth Tony is quintessential Vinnie Jones at this point in his career. Well, I guess the whole career.
The whole career.
Because he's hired muscle, and cousin Avi brings him in as like his guide / he's going to help me navigate the criminal world while I'm here, right? He comes highly recommended. He actually got his teeth helped out and molded because of the head. The head kind of did that, so he likes him a lot. But here's something very, very important. I don't know if you noticed this about his character, though. When they first bring him in, and he's talking to them about what they're trying to do, did you notice anything specific about him the entire time he's talking to Avi, Doug the Head, and all those guys?
That he purposely sat himself between Doug the Head's twin daughters?
Well, very true. One of the most important details about this movie is that they don't create these one-dimensional people. Everybody we've talked about so far, like you just mentioned, Saul is kind of hapless, but he's an expert with recognizing jewelry, right? And Avi obviously is hot-headed, incredibly hot-headed, but at the same time, he can be a sweet man. Like, you see it.
Yeah.
You can see it happen. So really important thing about Bullet Tooth Tony, he is an expert listener. Like, he is one of the best active listeners I've ever seen. I've been working in sales for over 12 years now. When you watch him talk to Avi and Doug and then try to get information for what he needs to do, he's asking very few questions, and he is listening intently to everything. Yeah. It's crazy. If you watch it, you'll see him. He's like sitting there. He's never reacting to what they're saying right away. He's listening. He's pausing, and then he asks another question. It's like a sales course. Seriously.
Yeah. And he is definitely there to work, because he doesn't even care what you call him. Not Bullet, not Tooth. You can call him Susan for all you like. But yeah. And also, I'd like to really, really point out, like you said, how cousin Avi, like you said, is hot-headed but can turn to like an incredibly sweet person. The transformation between Avi talking to the Head to Bullet Tooth Tony, one even being mentioned, like, oh, he sounds like he's a guy for the job. And then when Tony actually gets there, he almost has this boyishness to him now, because he's still mad, but I feel like he's more excited to watch Tony work and work with him than anything else when this part of the movie comes around.
Yeah, because you could tell Avi himself he's probably more of a businessman, right? Like, they even show kind of how he's in like a very large office, and he's got people working for him nearby. And so you can tell that even he's very intelligent, very witty, very sly, but you can probably tell too, he doesn't have a whole lot of exposure to this world. So yeah, he is kind of soaking it up, almost like he's getting to tag along with the police on a ride along, right? And so yeah, I agree with you completely that he's soaking it up. Like, he's absolutely enjoying this ride. And so yeah, it has this other layer, because the boxing promoters, they're terrified, and they're trying to figure out how to exist in this like crazy dark world they're part of now. And then everybody else is also dipping into something they haven't really had to do before, for the exception of like Boris the Blade and, Frankie Four Fingers, right? But those are the guys that are breaking the law on a fairly consistent basis. So,
yeah.
Yeah. I think the important thing about Bullet Tooth Tony for me is that he comes in at a time where everybody else is fairly established in their rule breaking or kind of what path they're going to be on. Whereas this is kind of the chance for Avi to enter the criminal underground, start to kind of get his legs under him. And so Tony actually kind of takes him under his wing in a sense, like we kind of talked about. There's a kind of a ride along feeling to this. And so you get to kind of see how he lives, because Tony's kind of near retirement in a lot of ways. He's not going to be someone that's going to do this for anybody. So it's kind of rare that they were able to pull him into this as a character and as his character arc. So I thought that was a lot of fun. The other thing that I thought was hilarious was that the first time that you actually see Tony interact with like Saul and the shit out of luck guys, the first time he appears where he clunks his gun on the window, that wasn't actually him. That wasn't actually Vinnie Jones. And the reason why it wasn't possible for him to be there was because in typical Vinnie Jones fashion, he was actually in prison. He was actually in jail that night for an altercation. Of course he was. so they had to have a double come in for like the first time he interacts with them on screen.
Oh my God.
But yeah. It's like, if you wanted to know what Vinnie Jones was up to at that point in his life, there's no better way.
No.
But hey,
that half reminds me of like the I don't want to say the good old days, but the ye old days when a website once existed called isdmxinjail.com, which, rest in peace. Never forget DMX. But yeah, that's Vinnie Jones. The man is a true wild card in every sense of the word.
Which, as this movie kind of goes, I think that's a really good way to kind of talk about just the plot. The plot always feels like a wild card, because you're never really quite sure what's going to happen, but at the same time, something's going to go badly, right?
Yeah.
And so we're calling this segment of the episode on the topic of milk. We've talked about how diamonds have kind of shaped the first part of the movie. The caravans kind of advance us into the next part. But Joe, what does milk play as a role in this movie? Can you remember?
Other than a solid source of calcium, I don't know why, because I feel like I have a good memory of this movie, and I don't know why I'm blanking on milk. I'm not making that connection right now.
Hey, that's okay. That's why we write it this way. It's meant to be provoking, thought-provoking, right? But the milk in this movie actually leads to one of those Tarantino-style conversations that happens, right? Kind of in that third act of the movie, right?
Yeah, I feel like it starts to almost be kind of like, it feels like that conversation we had at the start of the movie, where you've got the rabbis talking, and it feels like it fits for the scene, even though it may not have a greater weight in the rest of the movie. Yeah. But milk ends up having kind of an immediate weight on the movie after its introduction, because it's actually Turkish drinking a carton of it. And Tommy, who's insisting on, oh, that's really bad for you, he brings in this whole idea, like, evolutionarily, like, our guts just aren't used to the agriculture of food of dairy yet, which, by the way, honestly, is full of horse shit. Our bodies, we can digest it just fine. Most of us can. Sorry, Mark, I don't want to rub it in your face that I can have dairy and you can't.
The point is, though, it is kind of a fairly modern conversation, even given where they were in time, right? Because a lot of us weren't really talking about the impacts of dairy on the human body or anything like that. And people have talked a lot about that in the years since, right? So it was funny how this is a conversation being had in what's essentially like 1999/2000. Like it's a fairly progressive conversation to be having at that point in time, right? I would say it was even ahead of its time by maybe 10 years.
I completely agree. It's definitely this was the more philosophical approach, as opposed to like Psych, which is a great show, by the way, And you've got Gus, who decides to try and pick up women by going up to him and say, "Hey, you hear about Pluto? That's messed up." Because this was around the time Pluto was deplaneted. But
yeah, and
mm-hmm.
it's funny though. Like we've kind of honed in on these very specific things. This one carton of milk gets thrown out the window
Mm-hmm.
and sets up a way in a very Seinfeldian format to tie together all of these individual plot lines and stories and characters that frankly were all kind of on a separate trajectory to a point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I always found that funny. Yeah, like carton of milk tied this together.
I mean, and the way it does it too, it's very like, if you haven't seen this movie but you've enjoyed Anchorman, it's the equivalent of, I mean, not the equivalent of the burrito, but mechanically it works like the burrito being thrown out and now kicking off a major plot point of the movie. But instead of kicking the plot point off, like you said, it now finally brings together a cast of characters who were all chasing the same thing, but at the same time, you could almost feel like they're all in their own movies. And suddenly now they're all in the same movie because of the milk carton being thrown out of the window by Tommy.
Yeah. It's because you're thinking there has to be something that can start to bring all this. There's a convergence point or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. That's the unifying thing in this movie. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Freaking carton of milk, man. That
I know. Of all the things to do it, because even more so than like you eventually even like, I mean, at some point, Brickface. Did I say that wrong? Did I say Brickface? That's a Bricktop. Brickface. I'm like, I slowly am becoming my father, and I know I'm filling in things that don't be there. The entire pandemic, he kept saying COVID-19. And I'm like, Dad, I have no idea what crows have to do with any of this. And then he just looked at me like I was an idiot. But now he said he always said Steinfeld instead of Seinfeld. So here I am. Yeah, that Brickface fella. Making just a ruckus for things. No, freaking Bricktop. When Bricktop even meets up with Soul and Vince and Tyrone, that's under pretty serious circumstances. But it is still weird that like the movie actually ties together a lot more around a carton of milk than it does these guys knocking over or attempting to knock over Bricktop's bookie.
Yeah. I mean, we obviously are not trying to give away an entire movie. Like that's why we're not kind of going into some of the events that lead up to this point.
Oh yeah,
because it's going to ruin way too much for you if you want to actually see this and you haven't yet. Maybe you've seen it on Netflix and you're like, yeah, I skipped over that. I haven't seen it yet. Right? We obviously want you to go see it, but this movie ties together really well. And one of the questions I've always asked, Joe, because the movie, like you've mentioned, it ends where it begins.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar to some of these Tarantino movies, very similar to some Christopher Nolan movies too, that take that let's start at the end and come back. The question I have for you, based on that and how the movie kind of begins and ends very similar way, do we think Snatch has the capability to become another story? Like, does Snatch happen again once we see the stories unfold? Do you think it does? Do you think? Yeah.
I think it does. Like 100%. There's more can happen in this movie. After where the movie ends. So like again, it ends with Turkish and Tommy sitting in front of Doug the Head, and you got back again the dialogue of Turkish saying, "What do I know about diamonds? I'm just some fight promoter," and you're like, well. We just saw everything that unfolded until that point. The diamond's still in play, and a lot of the characters are very much still in play. So there could have been a Snatch too if he really wanted it to be, or if Guy Ritchie really wanted it to. But I could see him as someone who probably never really wanted a sequel. It's just kind of sometimes from like the artist standpoint, it's just a lot more fun to see where like the audience's head can run from there, because. Absolutely, we could have had a whole second movie from that point forward, and I mean, I would have watched it, but
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think I probably would have too, because I really did enjoy the world that he built with was essentially about 15 characters.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these characters had enough time to be fully developed in a meaningful way. You get to learn enough about each one, and they don't waste any time really in between that. So I do think that even though this movie got hit by critics, quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
the if you look at the ratings on a lot of these aggregate websites, even they aren't very nice to it. Occasionally you see one that's like, okay, 75, 80%.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people were rough on this movie. And I mean, it made back 8 times what it cost to make. So clearly some people
That's something.
they saw the
Mm-hmm.
entertainment value in it. And frankly, I will forever see this movie as a hidden gem just
Mm-hmm.
because of that fact. It didn't have like a massive, Hollywood backed following or anything. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely, to me, feels like a passion project. I don't know if you feel the same way though.
Oh, completely. Like this just seems like a movie that was made because someone really wanted to make this movie. And I mean, even like the whole idea that Brad Pitt like just wanted to be it because he wanted to hang out with Guy Ritchie. I mean, this is like honestly, this is Batman and Robin gone right, whereas George Clooney was just willing to help out a friend. This is like, no, this guy's my friend. I want to hang out with him, and they're in a movie, and now I'm going to be in his movie. Like, it felt like it'd be fun to make. It felt like it would be fun to be a part of, and it was fun to watch. And I think sometimes, like, of course, like when you go to a movie, you have to suspend belief to some varying degree, no matter what movie you're going to watch. You've got to let some of it go. And I think in this case, suspending belief doesn't really have to go for anything that happens in the movie itself. It's just you have to suspend the fact that you've seen a Guy Ritchie movie before. So
Yeah.
you're not like, oh my God, it's just the same thing all over again. Because I mean, like, I don't know, there are people who make sequels and we're not mad that we basically do the same story twice in a row because it's the same thing. Like you have to whittle the hero down so they rise back up. And then the movie will feel very similar like it did to the first one. And we don't get mad about it all the time. We do sometimes if we particularly hate the sequel. But I think it's the same thing with this one. It's like, okay, if you enjoyed Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, I think you're going to have fun watching this movie. As long as you're not like so, I don't know, in the mood to be a film critic at the time to the point where you can't enjoy it because it feels too similar to a movie that was done before by the same director.
And I think as a movie that has that crime gangster vibe to it,
Mm-hmm.
this movie is very careful to not give you too much comedy at one point. It doesn't give you too much seriousness either at certain points.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there are some areas where you can't get away from it, but it's
Yeah.
never too much for you to handle in that moment because the stakes make sense for things that occur. And so overall, I think it's a very well-paced movie, which some people disagreed with. I mean, I think the pacing in this movie is fantastic. And once
Yeah.
again, we've mentioned there's like no real wasted scenes. But
Mm-hmm.
as a balancing act with the comedy, though, one thing that I think helps this movie is if somebody does die, it's always off screen, which once
Yeah.
again helps kind of keep it comedic because you never truly have to
Mm-hmm.
face the true consequence of what's going down in this movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's where you kind of have the belief aspect of it is kind of there, where it's like, but this is still a comedic film, therefore
Mm-hmm.
the off-screen deaths, I think, kind of help reinforce that
They
belief.
work. I think they really
Yeah.
do. And again, to comment on the pacing of the movie, one, I think every scene builds on to the existing plot. Like everything, like I don't like. I feel like if he cut scenes out of this movie, they must have been really, really difficult to do because like what's there. Like I definitely wouldn't cut anything out of this movie from the point where it is right now. There's like no point where I could be like, well, like there's like 5 minutes we didn't really need this movie, or heaven forbid, like 30 minutes we didn't need this movie. And part of what really does help that is the comedy, because they're at the root of this thing, there's a pretty serious story going on. There are a lot of stakes going on given the players that are involved. And honestly, like some of the players are kind of legitimately scary when you really look at them. So having like those quips here and there, or like saying something at the start of the movie that felt like it may have been something to throw away, and suddenly it comes back more towards the end. Like that sort of like those sort of things add a levity that's needed, so it doesn't feel like it's intense the whole time. So I think like the pacing for this was brilliant. There wasn't like some like in like a movie where like you need to have some downtime where the characters are going to reveal something about themselves, or they start to really realize why they're doing why they're doing what it is that they're doing for the sake of the plot. And you don't get that in this movie. Instead, you get content, and it helps slow things down, not in the sense that it's going to make you think, but in the sense where you don't have to think because you get to laugh. And then you do get to come back to the greater plot of the movie.
Absolutely. And as opposed to the film itself, starting at the end and bringing you back there, our end is much more deliberate. And with that, we do thank you for listening to Digital Dissection. And as always, we do appreciate all that the Dissection crew does for us week after week. And we do actually want to do a special thank you this week because this was actually the most listened to week of our show before we recorded this one. So we really do thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We still can't believe that this is where we are in season 2, Joe. It's just nuts to think that folks want to spend their time with us. And so we really do thank you for that as we explore pop culture one episode at a time. If you did happen upon this show by accident, however, please drop us a review, comment on the show, let us know what you think. And as always, the doors are always open at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to send us a message, maybe an idea for a future show, or maybe your thoughts on diamonds. We're open to really any of it. So feel free to discuss there if you'd like.
Yeah, here like show. You bought it, you saw it. You learn a dog if you want it.
Was that until next time? Keep on dissecting. I can't tell based on your traveler voice.
Yeah, keep on dissecting. You cut up all you want.